probably the greatest pitfall is in buying the shell. And we had, spoken earlier about, let's say all shells are clean, but if you get a shell with problems, it could be devastating to you. But a shell everything can be as represented, everything can be in order, everything is as it should be, but the shell could still be a huge problem just because of the makeup of its shoulder base. And I'll give you an example. So I've spent years as an underwriter, as a brokerage firm, as a market maker, and I'll share with you kind of how I would look at a stock when I'm asked to make a market in it. So let's say a company would come and say, here's a stock, Dempsey, we'd like you guys to get behind it. We'd like to see us sell this to your customers. Here's our financials, here's our earnings. And I'd look at it, and let's say it's a good company, good earnings, good potential, great management, everything is right about it. And but a couple of factors come in there. First of all, let's say, so if I give it to my brokers and I tell them, let's get behind this stock and sell this stock, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up recommending for all of our customers, or most of them, to be buying the stock and putting it in their portfolios. And let's say if we make this recommendation and then the stock price collapses, what happens to our investor is he's lost a lot of money in his investment. He might have bought it for $10 a share, and 2 weeks later it's $6. He's not very happy with us. But what we have as a firm is, I now have 600 clients that have followed our advice to their detriment and lost money because we told them to do this. So this is something we want to avoid like the plague. We just don't want that to happen. So what happens is, but there's two ways that price of that stock can go from 10 to 6. One of them could be the company hits the wall, can't produce earnings, something wrong with its income statements, lose a big customer, something like that. But the other way you could lose it would be through the stock trading. Because let's say if this is a shell, and let's say that all of a sudden some blocks of stock hit the market, and let's say all of a sudden there's somebody who wants to sell 1 million shares of stock at $10 a share. I've just sold those shares to my customers at 10, and now somebody wants to dump 1 million shares on the market at $10 a share. I'm a market maker. I got to write a check for $10 million to buy that. I don't want to buy that. I don't want my customers to get hurt, but I don't want to write a check for $10 million. So what I do is I don't buy it, but nobody else will buy it either. And what happens is, so they start lowering the price, and then now somebody will, maybe at $6, somebody buys it. And what happens is, so let somebody buys a shell that's got the wrong mix of stockholders out there. There's some blocks of stock, but market makers like myself will say, no, I'm not going to take a chance on, getting this stock out to all of my customers, and then this stock hits the market and I have to buy it, or I'm going to lose all of my credibility with my customers. I don't want to be in that position. I'm going to pass. And what happens, not only do I pass, everyone else passes. And now you can't get any broker support. And you got a good $10 stock, but no one's going to touch it. Now let's say the next guy comes in, and he's got a similar situation, $10 stock, similar earnings. We take a look at the stock pattern. He doesn't have any of that. There's no blocks out there. There's nothing that can fall off and hit me. But maybe they were a bunch of stock promoters, and they took those big blocks of stock and they divided them up into a bunch of different entities, so that although the stock was out there, it looked like it was held by 20 different parties, and there's no one big block. But what happens is, so I see the stock is spread out, so there's no threat. But now I take a look at the trading history, and I see that I don't see those trades coming across the market. In other words, how did these guys get their shares? If they didn't buy them, through a trade, that must have meant that they were divided up in the back room. And maybe that in the back room they had this big block of overhang, and they knew that we wouldn't come in and make a market. with that overhang, so they decide to break up the shares and make it look like it's good, and it really isn't. So I still don't come in, and neither does anybody else. So what happens is, but because I understand how the market maker thinks, because I've been a market maker and I've been the underwriter, and I've owned brokerage firms, and I know how important all my customers were to me, that I know when I go to a market maker and I want him to come in and support and get behind the stock, I know what his fears are. So when I sit down with them, I'll say, this is the stock I want you to get behind. Here's our earnings. This is what we do. This is what the company's all about. And by the way, here's our shareholders list. And here's how all of these people got their shares. And you see these pieces here? These were bought through the market. So although that there's some sizable shares out here, these people paid $8, $9, $10 a share. This is not promotion shares. This isn't ambush stock. This isn't promoter shares. And they're smaller pieces, right? So once I understand, so I show that broker, the market maker, all the history of that stock, that everything is as it should be, that there is no loose shares out there. And in fact, probably the single biggest shareholder outside the company is us, with our 2 or 3%. But I tell the market maker, but don't worry about my 2 or 3%, because that's restricted. I can't sell it anyway. So what I talk to them about is, so there's nothing can fall on your head. Here it is. Here's the records. Look at it. Let's talk again in the morning after you guys have a chance to go through it. And then the next morning they say, wow, we've looked at it. Everything looks great. And we're going to get in it. And they will get in it. And they will trade the stock. And what will happen, if I go to 20 market makers, I'll get 18 of them get into the stock, because there's nothing to be afraid of. Now, this has nothing to do with the earnings of the company or the management. It has to do with the structure of the shell. But if a guy buys, and when somebody goes to buy the shell in the first place, they think that, well, I didn't have to pay $500,000. I was able to get the shell for $400,000. I got a good deal on the shell. Well, it might have blocks of stock in it that, in fact, prevent us from ever, being able to draw a market. So what happens is, the risk is, the pitfall is, you don't want to have to pay for the shell twice. In other words, when you come to Whitehall or somebody else and you write a check and you buy the shell, what you don't want to do is, you don't want to have to then buy all these big chunks of stock inside the shell on top of buying the shell, right? Because the whole idea is, you only want to write the check one time. And you want to know before you write the check, what is this really going to cost me? But a lot of people will buy a shell twice. They'll pay once when they buy, and then after the market makers turn them down, time and time and time and time and time and time again. And the market makers are saying, the reason I'm not going to get in is because of those blocks. So pretty soon the guy realizes, I can't even get started with those blocks. Now he goes to those shareholders and says, I need to buy your stock. Oh, you do? And you come to find out it was the brother-in-law of the guy that you bought the shell from. Or maybe it was the lawyer for the guy that you bought the shell from. This was all set up in advance. Yeah, they gave you $100,000 off on the shell, but they knew that they had you. They knew that you have to come and buy them out. So it's a pitfall. So what happens is, in addition to the due diligence, it has to be the makeup of the stockholders. And I'll tell you how a shortcut way that a prospective buyer can tell. All you have to do is ask the guy that wants to sell you the shell, tell me you want a list of the shareholders. And even though it's Greek to you, take that list of shareholders and send it over to a market maker and just ask him, would you make a market in the stock with that share distribution? And that guy is a pro. I promise you he's a pro, because he's betting his money. Because if he decides, I'll make a market in the stock, and he's ready to put up a bid of $10 a share, if he gets hit, he's out of business. I mean, because let's say someone's going to take him up on his offer because he's saying, I'm a buyer of this stock at $10 a share. All of a sudden, he gets hit with 1 million shares. It's going to cost him $10 million. He's out of business. So he's not going to do it unless he knows he can't get hit. So he will know how to look at that shareholder base. And invariably what happens is If there's people playing games, the market maker is going to look at that and he's going to come back to the guy and he says, I couldn't make a market in the stock no matter what. I don't care what you could put Microsoft in here, I can't do it because it's structured wrong. I could get wiped out. It could put me out of business. I have to say goodbye to this one.